All right, this is episode 2 of Pilot Initiation, a developer series slash podcast where me, host Shea Baker, and Solomon, co host, try to develop our written projects and artworks. Today we're going to be sort of reviewing chapter 2 and discussing how we can progress into chapter 3 of the book I'm working on, Lovia's Resonance. All right, so after proofreading, what were your initial thoughts?
I liked it. It was pretty fast, and that's sort of like the good and the bad of it. It's like it seems semi-rushed, but at the same time, it's like so fast to where you're missing some minor details that help build up. But at the same time, those details are there upon reread.
All right, so like to go a little further into that, what do you feel was rushed in a sense of like plot wise?
The hostile attack kind of just happened. Like it went, and it kind of threw me off with how fast that went. Cause I was just picturing all the characters, and then boom, it all blew up.
All right, that's a good thing because that's exactly how I was trying to like progress into it, like instantaneous action of plot wise, because that's like the most instant thing to happen. Other things will be kind of progress, sort of similar paced, but that's probably going to be the fastest action to happen in the whole book. All right, so what did you think about character development or introductions in that chapter?
I liked it. I kind of get the vibe you're going with for Lyra. What was her name?
Lyra Covier.
Lyra Covier. Yeah, you can kind of see that sense of humor you're gonna get from her. She's like the kind of cold but present person that just seems a little off-putting, but she's actually kind of sincere-ish.
Yeah. And what about other characters could you point out, if anything else?
I see William's preparedness and his kind of studiness of all the other characters. Like you said, it will happen.
All right. So, other than that, what questions do you have that I could probably put into further chapters from chapter 2? What questions from chapter 2 do you have?
Is that character dead? I need to know.
That is a huge spoiler, man. Why would you ask that now? Bro, I'm trying to avoid as much spoiler on here.
Okay,
so that's... Alright, I know we didn't discuss it last time, but that's kind of going to go into the part where, like, the futuristic technology kind of happens. So, fortunately, I will give you an answer to that. She is not dead, but that is going to be the technology that I want to introduce later, is the rejuvenation process. So basically, it's it wasn't rejuvenation, revitalization. Yeah. It's basically reversal of death. Like if a character is flatlined, but their body isn't completely shut down, it is available to a select part of the population. So with some people, they would be able to come back from the dead, but that isn't open to everyone in the series. So that answers the question. No, she comes back later.
Okay. And I saw you bring a lot of the tech you were telling me about into it in this chapter, like the Sunbringer. I remember you giving me a vivid detail that would be like one of the most destructive weapons.
Yes. So you're not going to see that soon, I would say, but you will see it be used and its destructive ability. I do talk a lot about the weapons that will be in the series because it's going to be more than just the ones that are already introduced. So you will see a lot of destructive capability from this race in the series, from all of their technology. Like we brought up the crime syndicate that might happen, of how they have their own set of weapons compared to the military style equipment. You'll see the comparison in the two for sure.
Okay. And going forward into the next chapter, are we going to get mostly info of what just occurred, or is it going to be like a mix between that and sort of bringing us down the level on the Earth and the current?
That's a good question. So what I plan to start the next chapter on is going to start with the world building aspect. So they tell you where they're going and they get there. in the same sense that they pretty much took off into the planet's orbit. So whenever they get there, that's when the chapter cuts off, and I want to start the next chapter by introducing where they are, and it's going to go a little more into detail with where they are on the planet, not actually what happens, but they will go into detail with what just happened and how is it affecting them currently, because you'll see like a lot being reported back to them, and within chapter 4, I want to say, or late chapter 3, you're going to see them reacting to what just happened in chapter 2.
Okay. And William, would you say he's like in serious panic mode right now, or is he like semi processing it?
Okay, that's a good character development question, because when I write him specifically, I try to get him like as background as a character as I can. So with him, he's having an internal panic. You don't see that being that it's written from third person too much, but when you get into later chapters, when I get to writing like actual conflict, immediate action stuff, you'll see that he's kind of having his own internal panics because he's never been in situations like this. But other people have, so he'll be able to rely on his teammates a little more. But at the same time, that's also going to push them to make him go a little further.
Okay. And I kind of liked how, going back to chapter 1, I like the little hollow things. I kind of get a vivid vibe from the way you had it written out.
Like, yeah, that's a good detail that I really try to focus on a little bit, because the hollow screens is their ultimate form of communication. So like it's basically just a swipe of a hand, and instantaneously they can connect to whatever or whoever they need to, in a sense. So that's a technology you'll see a lot of in this series.
And would this be like one of the, on a scale to like most horrific you're going for the book, would this chapter have been like at least halfway of that, with how fast it went and how it just happened?
Absolutely not. It will get worse, and I will try my best to make it the worst possible. So, what's being shown in chapter 2 is just a small taste of how bad it can get, but I can confirm that it will definitely get worse, in my opinion. But compared to like the instantaneous havoc that happened in chapter 2, I will say it probably won't be as destructive, but it'll be more graphic.
I got you. So it'd be more pinpoint focus and not more environmental.
Yes, that's the word, because when it's gonna be small scale, so it'll be more like rather the entire invasion, but just this small group or one of the species that's invading them. So you'll see a lot of like very isolated combat, and that's where I guess the destructive level of it dies down, but at the same time, the graphicness and carnage of it can amplify.
And so the tone is very set in serious mode right now. Will it just get more serious, or will it go like a little less serious back to high serious?
Okay, so that's a good question of how I can pace the series. What I'm trying to do with this next chapter is I'm trying to dial down the seriousness of it, but at the same time have them realize how dire the situation is. Because currently, well, they'll be in the next chapter, is kind of isolated from where everything's happening. So whenever they get there, they understand that a lot is going on with the rest of the world, but currently they're in recovery from what just happened. So they have moments to spare, but the rest of the world is like on alert right now. So that's a good question for pacing.
And for this next chapter, will it be more into like any of the side characters rather than Lyra and William?
Um, that's a good question. I don't think so, but I will try to implicate the characters a little more, because right now it's kind of bouncing all over with who you get to see the focal point of. But with the next chapter, I'm going to try to implicate enough to where we can get a read on all of the characters that I've currently introduced. So with the next chapter, expect a lot of world building and a lot of character introduction, a little more and more development to see. It'll be mainly character focused and environment focused rather than conflict points.
Okay. So very world building. Okay. Trying to think of another question. So did you have fun writing this chapter?
Absolutely. I loved every second of the havoc that I was capable of causing in just a matter of seconds. And following up with like how this one thing led to so much chaos at a moment's notice, that was very fun to write because I plan to do something similar in later chapters, but probably not as high scale as this one was. But you will see more of like instantaneous havoc like that.
Had me shaking in my boots.
Mm.
Okay. Man, I don't know. The chapter was like so short. I kind of it's hard to evaluate questions on it.
Well, think a little more on the next chapters. Then how do you think I should go about going through the next ones? That's a question for you.
The way you explain it for chapter 3, and you're gonna like have them in that recovery, but reassessing the situation type. I think that's the good part. But I really don't know how I would say it from there because I don't really know what's happening next. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I kind of just have to get a more insight on it.
All right. So, chapter 3 wise, how do you think that? How deep in character development would you like to see?
I like to definitely see how everyone's handling it. That much is obvious. And I kind of want to see, like, maybe a glimpse of what the other world is on. Like, they saw this happen. What's their reaction? Is, like, going to switch perspectives to that slightly?
That's a good way to go about it. Because I'm glad you said that because the way I'm writing is not so much focused on how outside people are perceiving everything, but basically people within the conflict are perceiving it. So, seeing outside perspectives could be a good insight on a lot of the conflict in the book.
Okay. And will we see, okay, about the revitalization process? You explained it to me, but they probably need more in depth on it, whoever's watching. Like, you said it's comparable to what we know about in Scythe, what their means of resurrection, sort of.
Okay, in the book Scythe, it's a lot more like in depth. So with their series, it's like they basically aren't dead, and well, they can die, but only the Scythes can confirm death. So they can pretty much just come back from nothing if the means call for it. But with this one, like, say if you're within certain ranges of death, they can't they can't do the process. So like, say if you lose limbs, you can pretty much do the revitalization process. But if you have like organs that are necessary to be done to use bodily functions, you can't do that. So it's more of like external damage that it focuses on rather than basically just bringing back people from the dead. And like I said, this process is going to be very exclusive to certain people, so not everybody will be able to have this. Only, I will say, it's only going to be people within the military of the book and people with money. So those are going to be the only people that have access to this process.
Okay. At the current moment, do you have, like, you're pretty much set in to start on chapter 3, all right?
Yeah, I have a good starting point for chapter 3 because you know where they're going, but you don't know what's going to happen pretty much once they get there. So a lot of it is going to be developing their environment of the current situation, and there's going to be a lot of outside sources telling them like what just happened rather than them seeing how it literally just happened to them. They actually are going to find out what the full scale of what just happened was.
And in chapter 2, I forgot what the name of that thing was that picked them up actually. Did that get there like really quickly, or was I
Yes.
tripping?
No, it was almost instantaneous.
Okay.
So a lot of their transport technology is instantaneous. So with the streamers, it can only exit orbit that fast. But with the castle, is what I called it in the series, is basically a medical transport. With that, it does the same thing but on a ground level, so it can pretty much go wherever it needs to at that speed.
As long as within the atmosphere.
Yeah,
right?
that's the point. But with that specifically, they have it designated to like whatever country they're closest to, so it will take less time. But at the same time, it's almost instantaneous, so it wouldn't really be a problem.
And so, as far as searching for people, how would they? You that kind of happened, but I was kind of like it was still processing because it kind of ended like right after that.
Okay, so their suits in the story, I kind of go into a little bit of detail of how their army gear is looking. I don't go into enough of it though, but I'm glad you brought that up so I can elaborate on it later. So their suits are loaded with like minor technologies. That way it could be easier to like pinpoint where somebody needs to be or pinpoint where they are. So that's going to be how the search party goes whenever it comes to finding the people. So they'll just use the signature coming from their suit. So they'll be back in the next chapter for sure.
Okay. And as far as trauma, you would say William is definitely traumatized right now, right?
I would say they're pretty much all traumatized because they pretty much just witnessed like something that no matter how much combat they've been through, they've definitely never seen something at this scale. So I'll say their reactions will be completely different, but they all share that same trauma because that is something they experienced together. So when it comes to how William reacts to it, he's definitely not going to be broken about it, but he's still going to have some like internal conflict about it compared to Lyra whenever she's prepared for this, but at the same time she wasn't prepared for this specifically. So she's a little more less torn up about it. So how they recover from it is a big part of the story because some of them are more prepared than others.
And as far as will we get some heavy team building in the chapter 3?
Mm. Yes.
Or,
well, not chapter 3 because chapter 3 is kind of going to be a slower paced chapter, but you will see them communicating a little more. Team building wise, as in solution to conflict, that'll definitely progress throughout the whole story. But as of chapter 3, you won't see it as much, but they'll definitely be communicating a lot more than they did in the previous 2 chapters.
And within this chapter 3, you know how people like they'll lash out and sort of go off on people in situations like this. Would there be any type of divide coming up between them because of this?
Ooh. There'll be divide, but not because of this current situation. So I get what you're going at. So they're all soldiers, so they know how to react to combat situation. But the reaction they'll have to this is going to be completely unified. But reactions they have to other things that can happen in the story, that's where that conflict of internal struggle comes in, because it can be like with the crime syndicate, their morals won't line up. So that's why they think, hey, one side wants this, one side wants that, and that's where that internal conflict can come in. And that's where you're going to see the most like arguments between the group. There's going to be a little more invested in that, but that's mainly where we're going to see it.
Okay. I'm trying to think. You don't have any type of detail on where you're going to hit by chapter 4, though, do you?
Chapter 4, it really depends on where I end chapter 3 on. Based on how I said I would go about it, the world building and character building, chapter 4 is probably going to be pushing the conflict. So from where they are currently to the end point of chapter 3 is going to go into chapter 4 talking about how they're getting to where the conflict points are, because it's not going to just be the invasion that's happening, it's also going to be that crime syndicate. So we're going to push a little more into both of those conflicts at the same time going into chapter 4. So that's a good point to bring up, because vision that far in can help develop chapter 3 a lot more.
And for these, do we have any new characters coming up in chapter 3?
Ooh, I do want to include new characters, but I don't have any names listed out yet. But there'll definitely be new faces. Not permanent faces like the five are, but it'll definitely be new side characters that do contribute to the story in their own way.
And while we're on the topic of names, was it a complicated process to name the characters you have so far?
Yes, simply because I am not good with developing names. Um, I'll say I kind of just like mashed some stuff together. Like William Caliber, that's definitely mashed together. Like I took the most boring thing I can find and then made something cool with it. And then like Lyra Covier, like that name was kind of just a weird process. That was like some things I've heard mashed with things that sound good in a way. So name building is a weird process to me, but I'll definitely keep it original with name processing.
But your tech stuff is pretty nailed down, though. Seems like you got the names all coded out for that.
Yeah, so with the name structure of how they actually speak to each other, that's something that can get a little hard to translate, but you have to think that they're military. So instead of addressing by first names, they go by last names to each other. But when you're reading from their quotes or what they say, it addresses them by their first name. So when you follow it by their first name, it's easier on the reader. But when I throw in that like military code of addressing by last name, I understand that it can throw some people off.
All right. And streamers. Let's talk more about streamers.
All right.
You said they were first built by somebody. I forgot
The Deimos, that is basically
the species.
yeah, that's the species on the planet Lovia. They're the equivalent to the human race on Earth, and basically they built these because they are basically more advanced in every way. So they just wanted technology to reach out as far as possible as they could, and that's what the streamer's main goal was. And they're still trying, but they have yet to perfect it. You won't see it perfected.
Okay. That throws that out of the way. Deimos, that's a hard name, ain't gonna lie.
All right. I don't know where I got that from. That was just a thought that I was like, I need to call them something other than humans, and I needed something, basically a fresh spin on the perception of life in this book. So that's why I came up with them, and I'll go into a description more of how their appearance is in later chapters, because so far I've basically just listed skin tones and hair types. And for this to be a whole nother species, that's really not enough. So, like humans, they do have similar skin tones and similar hair types, but there's also parts of the body that need to be addressed because they don't look as human as we do. So that definitely needs to go into production with how they look and be more descriptive of their appearance.
Please don't make them tentacle like.
No, they're definitely not.
Okay, cool. And I did like the descriptiveness of chapter 2 though. That was very descriptive. But I had to reread it though just to catch up on some of the details because they were implemented well, but the current situation just makes you
it's
lose
all over the
focus.
place. I understand. So like, I will say the speed of it was kind of a hard issue, but I wanted it to be very descriptive on what actually was happening for that reason. So just because everything's going sideways, I don't want any detail left out. I want everything to be in that. So that's why I was really descriptive with like people positions or like damage based on the body and everything. So that's one reason I made it that descriptive, because I wanted a full understanding of the environment that they were in.
But yes, with that tone, I definitely felt the chaoticness of that. That was
Yeah.
perfectly implemented there. Okay. And you already said it wouldn't be as chaotic in the next few chapters. Okay. So, man, I'm trying to spin off of the side character's name. I really forgot. Um, which one was a C? Started with a C.
Sia.
Sia. Tripping.
Yeah.
She wasn't the one that. She was the one that was damaged, right?
Yeah.
Semi-damaged.
Okay, so she was the one that they had to send a search party for.
Oh.
Colin was the one that is semi-damaged at the current state. However, these characters do return, so that's why I brought up the revitalizing process, because that's not the end of those characters. I did want it to be, though. So I'll put it that way. I definitely wanted it to be.
I felt it.
But for the sake of the story, I will branch off and make new technology to actually do more into the world building aspect and be able to give more character development other than just the main characters. So they're definitely going to be side characters still, but they'll definitely have more time into the main story.
Man, I think Colin was the one who had first noticed the stuff, right?
Colin, yes, because he was in the position to basically try to make contact with whatever it was. And that's why basically he was on lookout of the situation. And at the point that he tried to make contact, that's when things went sideways almost instantaneously. So I want all of these characters to like have their own individual traumatic experiences. So you already know who had the worst of it so far. And
yeah.
that's gonna have a lot of character fuel behind it. I just want that to be known. So even as a side character, you'll definitely see that specific person develop a lot
from that experience.
Yes.
And then you also said with revitalization that it won't regenerate limbs. You already confirmed that, right?
Okay, so I don't think we discussed that here, but yes, it does not regenerate limbs. It can repair them, but it cannot basically replace a whole arm. So being that it's a cyberpunk style environment, they're gonna need extra mechanics to their body. So say somebody loses an arm, it'll like basically stitch it up to where their arm's good and they're still alive if it pushed them to the flatline point. But they'll still need cybernetics. So you'll definitely see that later in the book.
And you said the crime syndicate would probably be like chapter 4-ish, right?
We'll definitely introduce them in chapter 4, but we probably won't see them in chapter 5. So that's how I'm going to go about chapter 4. It's going to be more introduction of what's going on with the conflict. So you'll know a little bit more in chapter 4 about what happened after they just crashed and what's going on the real world, say the crime syndicate level. That because they're now back to the surface, so they have to actually experience the actual world that they're in based on how the book started.
And we're gonna get like more vivid details of the landscape in this next chapter, though,
absolutely, right? Like landscape is something I want to work heavily on because I like legit drew out maps of how I want this planet to look, and a lot of it is like diverse environment. It's pretty much alien to what we would probably see here. So with floral life, I definitely want that to be more advanced than what we see every day. I want to be very descriptive on what their floral life looks like. The same thing with their fauna life, how animals look and how they behave towards other people. I want to be very detailed on that too, We probably won't see as much of like the wildlife in this book, but we'll definitely see it some point.
To just know it's there.
Yeah.
All right. Anything that you want to comment about chapter 2?
Comments on chapter 2. Um, Other than I really enjoyed writing it, I don't know too much because that was basically a chapter that I just wanted to make the conflict happen and basically have them a start point for the next chapter. The way I wrote that was like I know where chapter 1 left off and I know how I wanted chapter 2 to end. So it was basically point A to point B with the writing process. And would you say I did that?
Yeah, you definitely did it. Do you think you might get people hooked with that one though?
I hope that's the point that gets them hooked because being that it's such a drastic turn of events, I hope that's what gets their attention the fastest. Because basically, I mean, there'll be other points in the book where I try to keep people reading, but not like try hard. Like, I'm definitely going to make it as descriptive as I did in chapter 2 with other plot points. But when it comes to overall chaos and conflict, I feel like that's close to the highest point of conflict we'll see, but definitely not the highest because that's way too early in the book to just put it there and be the rest of falling action.
But it was definitely an attention grabber, yeah.
Yeah, so I hope that gets everybody's attention when I actually publish this. So, yeah, that was actually fun to write, and I hope that gets the attention overall, everything, because that's a major turning point in the plot.
And so far, how long would you say it takes you to write each chapter?
So, that one I kind of started early. Um, I won't say I started it immediately after finishing chapter 1. I started chapter 2 like a month ago, which is a long time for us to be doing episodes weekly. But I feel like if I really dedicated to it, I could definitely finish a chapter in a week. And it'd be lengthy enough to where we have full character development, full environment development, and plot resolution and conflict development. So it's really of how much time do I have to spare to get everything covered that I need to get covered in chapters. So with this chapter specifically, I had plenty of time to do it. It was a very fast-paced chapter, but at the same time, I made sure to make it very descriptive in all the points that I covered. So that was one thing that I made sure I had time for is description and plot points that I wanted to make.
It wasn't nearly as long as the process for chapter 1, though, was it?
Chapter 1 was a little bit longer because I actually had to think of everything for chapter 1, honestly. So I had to think of how I wanted the book to be themed, the characters that I wanted to be introduced, and the setting that I wanted the overall book to be. That was a much harder process than developing chapter 2 because chapter 2, everything was already set out to me. I just needed to basically get the conflict introduced a little further at that point.
So you think you may have chapter 3 done by our next episode?
I will definitely push as fast as I can to make sure it's completed and detailed and every point plot is covered by next episode, but I can't guarantee that it'll be finished. But even if it's not, we'll still discuss where it's going and how am I currently in the chapter. So we'll definitely have something to cover.
And as far as the overall theme for chapter 3, it's going to be like one of those calm before the storm type themes, or
Yes, that's exactly how I plan to make it because the way chapter 3 is kind of a recovery process, but there's still so much more to come. So it's definitely going to be more havoc to see in the plot, but as of chapter 3, you won't see it just yet. You're just going to know of its existence. All right, here's our last one.
Last one.
Make it a good one.
Just give me a second. Let's take a minute to generate. Okay. Man, I'm kind of wore out. Okay. Will we get more of the like people that are over them in the next chapter, like their sergeants or whatever?
Oh, that is a good question, honestly. So, yeah, communication has to come from somewhere because they can't just figure out everything on their own. So, I will definitely implement people above them. I won't necessarily say they're superiors, but superior to them. So, we'll definitely see more major name characters, but at the same time, I can't guarantee that they'll stay in the story for long. So, we'll definitely see a lot more character names within chapter 3 and so on. But as of making them vital to the plot, other than communication, I don't think that's going to happen too much.
Understandable.
All right, I guess that's where we close up. Host Shea Baker, co host Solomon Page, and that